Good evening again. Uh, Took a little break. This is part two, talking about Rome and the early conflicts with the Jews that were under the auspices of the Roman Empire, and some of the origins of the angst. But I want to pan out a little bit because today was no King's Day, and hearing some reports and some outright lies around Trump being able to draw a precise map of Syria. That's right up there with, some sort of religious miracle. So it's very frustrating for me. And that's just expressing maybe a kind of maybe a selfish thorn that's in my side that I've had for a long time. But I'm sharing, and I want full disclosure and kind of a level of transparency with these broadcasts that people can rely on, and hopefully it will help them be brave in self-reflection and self-expression, and gain some footing in this very reactive world with, the ADHD attention span getting shorter and shorter as the electronic world permeates the physical world. The molecules are moving faster, and people are getting unhinged quicker, and the consequences of being unhinged are becoming more like the status quo, that there are no consequences, and it's the thing to do, the thing to be, the way to be, reactionary, let's say. I can be reactive at times. I mean, sure, it's fun to state the obvious and say that something's ridiculous and have like a zinger, but it's also nice to have a place to come home to with your thoughts and your feelings. And reactionariness is not a place to come home to. So, ultimately, something core will need to change across the world someday. I'm not talking about like, an alien invasion. That wouldn't change the world. Only hard internal work changes the world. And of course, this project is most likely not going to be something that governments or social leaders or religious figures are going to announce and people are just going to get down to it. It's something that will inevitably have to occur. And I don't mean this in a prophetic way or some sort of Nostradamus part two, or Madame Blavatsky Reloaded or something like this. I'm talking about like the evolution of being human and dealing with problems at the baseline, rather than dealing with problems when you find yourself halfway through it and you have a reaction, then you have a judgment, then you have a punishment, and end of story, as if that solves anything. Punishment does not solve crime. It might deter crime in some small percentage. And so here's my point, and then I'll get down into part two, that the problem is mental, emotional standards, morals, principles, ethics. To me, those are the real angels. Morality, universal morality, universal humanity, universal ethics, a moral code, a human moral code, not a religious moral code. It cannot have any biases, like there can't be any like opinions around morality or ethics. It has to come from something much, much deeper than the ego, than someone who can form an opinion or a contrast or a rebuttal or an argument. This is all ego. This has to come from a child level, like baseline basic needs and principles. And those morals and principles and ethics have to be enforced. Above and beyond religion, capitalism, belief systems, monetary securities, even instinctual needs like food, shelter, warmth. And in this world that we live in and we have lived in for a long time, since Lucy, the real Eve of Africa, stood and gave birth and moved everyone forwards. Imagine if we had an attitude based on fact that civilization came from Africa. We know this, and it's factual. And it was a moral obligation, principled in respect and admiration and communion with the truth, that Africa must be maintained at the highest level possible in order to honor its contribution to the human species as a kind of a exercise in respect and appreciation, for instance. And anyone that would disagree with that, anyone that felt any pushback around that, would be disciplined by their community. Well, how would that work? And I won't go into that. It's highly speculative, and that would be for maybe another video. I don't mean like private thoughts at home and your community would hunt you down like Frankenstein's creation. I mean being vocal, going out, like as a politician or public figure and rallying against it, and but in short, just as another example of how dysfunctional our priorities and our foundations are across the world. And I mean this more in a societal level, the status quo and the things that people bend and contort themselves to fit into and be seen as in agreement, the things that people compromise in order to self-sacrifice to make other people happy or keep their jobs or simply put on a mask of sorts. Very superficial situation. And so here's the example. It's hard not to ramble because I like to ramble. So the ICJ and the ICC have officially declared that Israel is committing a genocide. Period. These are grown-ass adults whose entire life, devotion, dedication, professionalism, scholarship, everything, I mean, these are hardcore academics and officials who have been doing this for a long, long time. And not just around Israel. But now, as a side note, Israel has a lot of vetoed complaints against it in the United Nations. Of course, the United Nations is a bit of a joke unto itself. But I'll get into that in another video. It's definitely not an autonomous body without bias who represents universal truth and justice and conscience. Its conscience has been bought and sold at its inception. But back to the ICC and ICJ. So the ICC issues a warrant for more than just Netanyahu. This warrant is not enforceable. Now think about that. Think about it. If you have an arrest warrant and it goes out to all the local police, and maybe in some certain circumstances it might go across several state lines, depending on whether you're a fugitive or you're wanted for the by the FBI and etc. But let's just say that it goes to several other states as well, just to kind of ramp up the urgency of your arrest. And suddenly, well, no one does anything because they can't. The arrest warrant is not enforceable. So you're hop, skipping, and jumping from state to state and even back to the original crime scene just to make another mark on the wall that you were there and you're still free. Well, that's what Israel has been doing since 1948. And the ICC and the ICJ, they do not have a police force or a military force to go out and capture the person they want. Imagine that. There's a mass murderer loose in your neighborhood, and the police department does not have jurisdiction to hunt him down or her down, or in some cases, it down. So that's the ICC and the ICJ. Now, if a person comes into a particular country, the ICC and the ICJ can petition to have that person arrested. But it's up to the leaders of that country. So when Netanyahu was welcomed to the White House while he was a fugitive, and still is a fugitive, he was given like a 20-minute standing ovation. Completely, moralistically, a completely psychotic situation where I don't know what it takes to have that kind of collective mindset of denial, and but it's scary. It's scary that these creatures who justified the mass slaughter of the indigenous of Turtle Island, quote, the American Indians, those guys are still around, bigger and worse than ever, or maybe exactly the same. It is inhuman, and the people who dehumanize are themselves, ironically enough, inhuman. And maybe for another talk, I'll get into some ideas I have around how it is that people are inhuman. And the pushback is from the humans. So it's almost like there's a separate species of mind walking around doing stuff. And I suppose you can categorize it as sociopathy and misery loves company, and there's all kinds of clinical terms that you can put to it, but it doesn't explain anything. You can say, well, it's the privileged class, it's the Epstein class, it's a lack of this, a lack of that, didn't have this, didn't have that, has too much of this, has too much of that, but it's still not an explanation. It's just teasing around the edges of a bigger mystery, how it is that, for one, these people get into power in the first place, how it is that there's no screening process. There was once a psychological, like a board of psychologists that wanted to give a report on President Trump, and it was outright refused. It was like, no, we're not going to have any psychoanalysis going on here. And of course, even if that was to occur, I don't think that the American public would have any baseline reference points to have a collective response to that. Like if someone says President Trump is a narcissist, well, who has the personal experience of really understanding that statement and what it implies in order for it to throw up red flags, threaten to quit their job if Trump is elected, or if you're a president of Intel or Lockheed Martin? Well, maybe Lockheed Martin wouldn't threaten to shut the doors of his industry, but maybe he would invite such a sociopath into his ranks. But at the same time, although you think that Lockheed Martin and their shareholders are making a profit from Trump, he's risking something as well. There's a double-edged sword there. So there's no screening. There's no standard of psychological preparedness. There's no moral standards. There's no background check. Like if to be a president, you had to go through a grueling 6 months of interviews, psychological examination, tests, counseling, psychotherapy. People would come in and almost interrogate, like watch body language, do research on his, like, I don't know how many bankruptcies he's had, like 6 or 7, his dealings with New York and why his reputation was the way it was, his taxes, his childhood, his father, the guy that replaced his father, what his emotional quotient is, like what level of his adulthood actually at. Like in AA, if you started drinking alcohol when you were 15 years old and you're 60, you're still 15 years old according to AA. Like, they consider when your addiction started, that's when you stopped growing emotionally. Okay, so Trump is a typical, well, and not so typical, because for a child king to come to actual power is very rare, but it happens. And Trump is the archetypal red-faced child king, like Joffrey in Game of Thrones. In Game of Thrones, that's Trump. Joffrey and Trump are, that's the child king. And a very, very dangerous, high level, high velocity, volatile situation. Because you have two clashing roles here. You've got a child who's trying to grow up and get certain needs met, but it's too late. But those needs are always early. They're always on time. But satisfying those needs, it's not going to happen. It's too late. So then he's in a role to be an adult, which most adults have learned how to cope with those needs not having been met, or how to get those needs met incrementally, like day by day, moment by moment, or maybe just once every 6 months when they go on vacation, who knows. But ultimately, the severity of this clash of child and an adult role, totally irreconcilable. And so had Trump gone through a psychological examination, and with like 6 to 12 different categories of psychological screening and departments and experts, I'm talking about morals, principles, education, courage, truth-telling, able to self-examine, apologize, have empathy, sympathy, so on and so forth. He would never have become president. He would not have even, that would not have even been on the table. So this is what I'm talking about, that will need to change eventually, that the baseline is the quality of the mind and where you are with the baseline human principles of behavior and operation in your day-to-day, truth-telling, sincerity, owning your heavy diapers, changing your own heavy diapers, apologizing, integrity, all these things are around behavior and inner world stuff, like your word, for instance, being true to your word. How many people do you know that are true to their word, who bend over backwards to keep their promises and commitments? There's a lot of distractions in the world that are ultimately keeping people from, I guess, noticing that these things are missing and replacing them with easier ways of expressing themselves. Yeah, so I made some notes. The one about the ICJ and the ICC, I've already said that. Identity and primal autopilot. So, just in short, and I promise I'll get to part two, that in many ways, because people don't think about what they're going to say or examine their moods and forewarn people before they express that mood, there's no overseer, let's say, in a lot of cases. A lot of cases, people are just simply wigging out and picking up the pieces afterwards. Very haphazard way of being. And I feel like it helps to have a conscience. It helps to understand that people have feelings and to be a feeling-based person, an empathetic person. Yeah, that's pretty much it for that part. Oh, and a little tidbit about the ICC and the ICJ. Let's toss in The Hague as well. Did you know that the United States has something in the law books, written and in law, called the Hague Invasion Act? That means exactly what its title implies, that the United States government has the right to deploy special ops brigade group to The Hague, physically invade The Hague, and by any means necessary retrieve said American criminals if and when and where The Hague has apprehended them and has them in custody. Now imagine that. And who, I think I already covered this in another video, but just as a reminder, there were about 7 or 8 U.S. congressmen who wrote to the ICC and the ICJ around Netanyahu being coined a bona fide war criminal and responsible for genocide. They threatened to sanction the members of the ICC and ICJ. I'm using ICC and ICJ together because it's more convenient for me, because right now, because I have several thousand files running around in my head, I'm not sure which one of those bodies at any given time has declared whatever I'm quoting they've declared. And when I say they, sometimes it's just the ICJ, and then other times it's the ICC. They don't always, like if one says something, it doesn't mean the other one just repeats it. They're separate bodies. They do, one may be working on one case and the other one a completely different case. And so they're not in the same building, let's say. Kind of like the FBI and the CIA. They have their own thing going on, and every once in a while they meet. So part two, Judaism and the Roman Empire. So there's a lot there's a lot to talk about, but I'm mainly focusing on angst and retribution and a sense of entitlement and all this biblical uh, um, justifications and sort of a like a it's just very very peculiar to me that um, there's so many other ethnic minorities in the world that uh, could also do the same thing, but because of Israel's strategic position as the unsinkable aircraft carrier, they they've been put by Britain a long time ago uh, to do what they did as a multitasking uh, sort of a, well, we know it was a colonizing project, but it wasn't just colonizing. They were establishing a military foothold for Britain and later for the G7 in general. And so we could say, for instance, if the Chinese had good reason and there were enough of the original indigenous to Turtle Island, the quote American Indians. By the way, there's no such thing as an American Indian. It's just a completely cognitive dissonant phrase, but it's just a way of psychological warfare with the Indian psyche to call them American Indians that just further disenchants them subconsciously. So, and by the way, Tomahawk missiles, that's another nonsensical subconscious way of poking the bear that's in a cage in a circus. So let's say let's say there were, by some miraculous uh, evolutionary quirk, let's say there were 15 million indigenous to Turtle Island, concentrated somewhere on the East Coast. And China communicated with them clandestinely. And let's say there's somewhere up north, like away from prying eyes, so to speak. And by some way, shape, or form, they were given arms and training, clandestine training. And China developed an indigenous right to reclaim America. And then later they smuggled in various apparatuses and parts to build a nuclear weapon somewhere in Canada or underground. Some almost impossible feat, but they did it anyway. This is all hypothetical, but I think you're getting my point. Because China wants America, right? So I'm just saying, in this example, they want America, its natural resources, etc. So the indigenous gain this fervor to reclaim their ancestral home, and they invade Rhode Island. Okay, they take a Rhode Island, and then they move downward and they just start taking state after state. And then they fan out, and other indigenous who are within various states all throughout the United States, they start signing up charter militias, and they start, and they're all embedded, deeply embedded, been around for decades and decades, so they know the land and the people they're dealing with, and before you know it, you have an ethnic cleansing of Anglo-Saxons across America by the indigenous, armed and trained by the Chinese. Well, great for the Chinese, terrible for the indigenous, because eventually the indigenous are going to find themselves asking the Chinese, well, what's yours and what's mine? You know, and then the Chinese are going to be saying, well, you know, we did you a favor, and now we want our pound of flesh. So how about being a unsinkable aircraft carrier, and here's some illegal nuclear weapons in the meantime as a deterrent, so that we can do what we want to do and manipulate country after country after country and soft colonize Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. Dubai is not really on my list because it's kind of a artificial situation there. I don't really know what to make of Dubai, but the big, you know, like the more long-term countries, Lebanon, although Lebanon's a bit of a wild card. They're definitely not what I would call culled by the West. And so Israel has this privilege, okay? This privilege to act out and have a catharsis and have a claim, a biblical claim, which would be ridiculous under any other circumstance. But because that Israel is a proxy militia, a proxy apartheid colonizer militia for the G7 with a nuclear deterrent, and a military industrial complex as well, because there's not much natural resources in Israel. There's no oil, there's no gold. It's pretty boring as far as natural resources go, although there is natural gas off the coast of Gaza, and coincidentally that is not legally Israel's, it's Palestinian natural gas, because it's within the jurisdiction, I believe, of Gaza, or at least however that's translated. My research has told me that the rights to that would be to the Palestinians. So, and already, that Israel has been flying in the face of international law since the beginning. So there's a little bit of that. So here we go, part 2. 39 minutes in. So I mentioned at the end of part 1, it's important to not skim over references in a generalized outline of said reasons, like what's Alia Capitolina, for instance. Digging down further refines what might turn into an uninformed opinion, a flippancy of knowing just enough to start a debate, but not enough to actually discuss beyond a knee-jerk poke. So what I mean, again, just to reiterate and kind of recap, is that when you're reading something, and I used this example in part 1, say, well, Rome did this to the Jews because they did something in Sicily that pissed the Romans off. So You got to find out what that was that they did in Sicily. I'm not saying they did anything in Sicily. I'm just using it as an example. Don't just assume, oh, well, it must have been something really bad. That's important. It's really important to um, like absorb that into your being. I don't mean that in like a a woo-woo way. When you absorb knowledge, a piece of knowledge, it changes you. You I can't say that you become it because that sounds um, kind of abstract and it's hard to grasp onto that. But let's just say that it changes you. That's all I can say. And then when it happens to you, then you'll understand what I'm talking about. So that when you, like, a long time ago, I used to read poetry and short stories, mainly poetry, like Edgar Allan Poe's short stories. And then I started to read his biography and also found out that he did a book on seashells. I mean, scientific, like, seashell cataloging. Um, so I liked to read the biographies of people who I admire, not just their writings or their works of art or their speeches, but actually their parts. Like I like to learn about the contents of the soil, not just that you can plant something in it, but where did it come from? What's it made of? What happened to it? And it helps. It helps have not just knowledge but wisdom. You can feel things. You can anticipate. Well, like I said in part one, if you find out in Sicily that they have done this mistake or this thing 75 times, and they've been warned 75 times, and on the 76th time, they were punished severely and exiled. Well, okay, yeah, enough's enough, and you get it, right? Well, if you didn't read that, and you just assume, well, oh, they did something in Sicily once, and the Romans got pissed off and kicked them out. Well, it's very superficial. It's very what if someone asks you what did they do? Well, I don't know. Well, that completely destroys your entire standing in being knowledgeable of what's going on, and it leaves too many holes and gaps for the person to argue against you and against your intelligence. So be ready. Be ready for people. Like if you're going to have a debate about Thomas Jefferson, be ready to get questions around his 14-year-old mistress who he had a relationship with via Paris and that whole situation, that whole early Epstein class foundation that America was built on. So, thoroughly know what you're curious about as much as you can. So, what is Alia Capitolina? Exploring Alia Capitolina, Hadrian's Jerusalem. Alia Capitolina was a Roman colony built by Emperor Hadrian on the ruins of Jerusalem, 130 to 135 CE. Following the Bar Kokhba revolt. Renamed to honor Hadrian, Elias and Jupiter Capitolinus. The city featured a Roman grid plan, pagan temples, and a ban on Jews entering, transforming the Jewish holy site into a pagan city until the 4th century. Well, that's curious. I wonder how many people knew that Jerusalem used to have a temple to, I believe it was, Jupiter and Venus. Curious. Key aspects of Aelia Capitolina establishment. Emperor Hadrian founded the city as a Roman military colony. Curious. Coincidence? Founded the city as a Roman military colony to permanently Romanize the region and destroy its Jewish character, replacing Jerusalem as the city's name. Urban structure. It was designed with a typical Roman grid featuring 2 main north-south Cardo streets and east-west Decumanus. I read what I wanted to read. With a Roman gate, traces found under modern Damascus Gate, acting as the entrance. Paganization. Temples to Jupiter and Venus were established specifically over the Temple Mount and the site of present-day Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Ban on Jews. A harsh decree forbidden any circumcised person from entering the city. Well, that must have been an interesting checkpoint. Let's see. Which was enforced by the Roman 10th Legion until the 4th century. Legacy. The Roman layout still forms the foundation of modern Jerusalem's Old City. The name Aelia persisted in the Arab name Elia after the Byzantine period. In form of what I was talking about, question everything that's mentioned. Now, what's this Bar Kokhba revolt that keeps coming up as a touchstone of the punishment, which is not being explained whatsoever? A lot of times these academics, they're not writing this paper for anyone else but themselves. So, or their peers, like, 12 or 30 other people that will be able to access these records in their scholarly memories and know what, oh, well, that's that. I know what that is. And they just keep reading and everything's fine. But as a someone who's not specializing in Roman Judaic conflicts, you gotta figure this stuff out so that you know, well, that was about that, and just know where all the pieces fit. The Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 CE. So what is that? That's 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like 3 to 4 years. Was the final major Jewish rebellion against the Roman Empire in Judea, led by Simon Bar Kokhba, who was regarded by many as the Messiah. How's that, I wonder? Maybe that will be another video, how it is that well, I won't go there right now, but that seems counterintuitive. For further going in here. So, triggered by Emperor Hadrian's plans to rebuild Jerusalem as a pagan city and restrictions on religious practices, the uprising initially established an independent state but was ultimately crushed, resulting in catastrophic casualties and renaming of the province. Key aspects of this revolt. Cause. The rebellion was largely triggered by Emperor Hadrian's decision to build a temple to Jupiter on the site of the ruined Jewish temple, and Venus too, coupled with a proposed ban on circumcision and the forcing of Hellenization. Simon Bar Kokhba was a military leader who united the Jewish forces and was supported by Rabbi Akiva. Key events. Now, think about this as I'm about to read something here. I'm going to have a little drink because I am a human being and not AI. Okay. Key events through this in this rebellion, how this all went down. The rebels employed guerrilla tactics and created underground tunnels to surprise the Romans. They successfully took control of large parts of Judea for over 3 years. In response, Hadrian sent a massive force led by Julius Servius, who methodically crushed the revolt. Outcome: the revolt ended in 135 CE with the fall of the fortress of Batar and a final brutal crackdown. It led to massive population loss of roughly 580,000 deaths, widespread slavery, and the banishment of Jews from Jerusalem. So I guess there was a little bit of both going on there, because you can't banish them and then also put them into slavery. So I'm not really sure how that all makes sense, but nonetheless, that's pretty much what went down. Significance. This revolt marked the end of the last significant push for Jewish independence in antiquity until 1948, fundamentally altering the demographics of Judea. Well, this whole idea of Jewish independence, this is for another video, but Zionism is not about Jewish independence. It's about Israeli independence. And it uses Jewish independence as a poster child to their cause. Zionism is anti-Judaism. Anything that like Christian Zionists, I cover this in another video, there's no such thing as a Christian Zionist. Because if you're a Zionist, you're a nationalist, which then means there is a pecking order of ethnic, like an ethnic pecking order. Like, if you're an Anglo-Saxon American and you're a nationalist, you don't want African Americans roaming around. You don't want Chinese Americans roaming around. You are a supremacist, which means you're not a Christian. Okay? So there is no such thing as a Christian Zionist. It's just Zionist. You're a Zionist. And putting Christian in front of it is kind of like putting American in front of Indian. You're hiding something. Hiding the fact that Indians are not Americans. They are the indigenous, the original landowners of this entire continent. Or, well, at least the part of it that their borders or territory, like if you go back and look at a pre-Civil War or pre-American colonizer map of the United States, there were more Indian nations than there are states, as far as my recollection goes, or at least as many. I mean, this place was packed full of tribes you've never heard of. And, of course, they were perpetually warring against each other, too. Well, not too, as if, we don't have American states annually going to war with each other. Not yet, at least. That would be an interesting existence. We outsource our death and destruction. Meaning, not we, but our American government and the war profiteers and the board shareholders that don't really have much anything else to live for but death. Very peculiar situation. Kind of Borg level stuff going on. So Jewish independence. I mean, that's for another video. I'm gonna spin off into something else I would love to talk about for hours and hours, and that's the whole idea of ego and identifying as a particular culture. Like I'm Italian, or I'm Sicilian, or I'm Russian, or well, no, I'm not Russian, I'm Ukraine, or no, I'm not from Ukraine, I'm Azerbaijani. You know, the list goes on and on and on. You know, this whole idea of identifying as, no, I'm not Chinese, I'm Taiwanese. Or, no, I'm not from Japan, I'm from Hawaii. To me, this is a huge obstacle for evolving past conflict and past these roadblocks that come up that people can't supersede. It's like a high school teenager level varsity jacket wearing conundrum where, you know, you've got these certain patches on your jacket that others don't, and therefore it gives you certain status, assumed status, although no one but the football team can relate to it. Never mind that. Everyone else assumes that, well, those are important. I don't know why they're important, but they just are. So the identity, the ego, the story, the us and them, and distinguishing yourself from another human being. And oh, you're African. No, I'm not. I'm Congolese. And like, you know, it's a game. It's just really, if you get down to the nitty gritty, if the thunder claps and the lights go out and it hits the fan, everyone is human in the dark. Just remember that. And also how children play. Like if they've not been indoctrinated and programmed to attack, children play with each other. There is unconditional love, unconditional. They don't care. They don't ask preemptive screening questions. Well, are you Pentecostal or Southern Baptist? Like, you know, again, it goes back to morals, ethics, principles, baseline human nature, and anything that tries to supersede that needs to be put in check and needs to remain entertainment and not anything serious. It's sort of like a tattoo. Like if you get a tattoo of a seashell with an arrow through it, well, good for you. I don't need to know what that means. And if it does mean something, and I do know what it means, then so what? But turn around and make it into a national icon and say, you know, death to all hermit crabs, and launch a worldwide invasion of pet stores and ocean shores to eradicate the hermit crab. That's not good. So don't get carried away. You know, don't get carried away with mythologizing stuff that is really, at the end of the day, not worth killing your neighbor over, not worth risking your life over. It's we have to get past these ego pastimes, these imaginary important things. It's we're constructing importance out of thin air. We're making stuff up because we're all human. When the lights go out, it's kind of like an accident scene. I've been on a lot of accident scenes, and it's like a bubble. It's like you go inside of a bubble. It's really weird. Ego drops. There's no room for ego when someone has a compound fracture. And everyone is the same. The only thing that matters is who knows how to help and who doesn't know how to help and who needs help. That's the only thing that matters. If you ask someone for their jacket so you can prop up someone's head to keep the water in the gutter from going into their face, they'll rip it off their back immediately. They won't be, they will take it off their back immediately. They don't care. It's incredible. It's incredible how little, well, actually an accident scene is not little, but it's just interesting how fragile the ego is, that it can actually just disappear and people become purely human for that, in that context. And then slowly but surely, ambulance comes, people are picked up, carried away to the for-profit healthcare facility, and maybe not, they may or may not get the right medical treatment or the best medical treatment. And then the people who helped, they get back in their cars, they turn on the news, oh, there's a new story on Netflix, and they go about their day, and then they're right back into it again. So, back to the Romans and the Judaism. So I put in marks to outline a very peculiar situation here. The rebels employed guerrilla tactics and created underground tunnels to surprise the Romans. Sound familiar? They successfully took control of large parts of Judea for over 3 years. Now imagine that. That before Hamas, the Jews did it too, but for totally different reasons, incomparable reasons, as far as I'm concerned. And I may do a comparison at some point in time, but fundamentally, let's just say that the Romans were accepting of, up to a point, within reason, of there were certain things the Romans were asking of all faiths to abide by. Kind of like when you become an American citizen, you can also be drafted, or your child can be drafted. So just keep in check, or keep in mind, that as a citizen of a power, you do give away a little bit of your power as a citizen. And if you're a conscientious objector, then you probably live in Canada or Taiwan or Cuba or wherever else you can be where the American government can't arrest you, or you get beat down by a group of would-be special forces trainees. So so that's that. That's the that's a kind of a framing of the Roman Judaism conflict that rose from this protesting of various civil things that Rome was asking everyone to do, not just the Jewish people, but everybody. And there was pushback, but not extraordinary pushback. But for whatever reason, it mounted into a bigger pushback when Rome went to build this Jupiter-Venus temple on top of the ruins of Jerusalem. Well, again, we have to get past this investment in sentimentality, holy sentimentality. There are more important things to invest your power in. Current conditions, world famine, helping your neighbor who you may or may not even know, helping yourself, for instance. It's extra. It's not necessary. It's entertainment. It's serious entertainment. And it also is used by governments to convince the public that might is right because we're doing it for this reason. And it's never the reason they say they're doing it for. It's monetary acquisition, like cloaking it in religion, and ultimately, I mean, how many people would join the army if the government really told them the truth? Like, well, look, you're going to be going to Vietnam to die and mass slaughter innocent people in order for our shareholders to make a profit and our war profiteers and manufacturers to make more bombs and hand grenades and DDT. Yeah, I mean, if they told them the truth, how many people would then acknowledge that truth as their truth? So there has to be a mythology created. And what I'm getting at here is you either tell the people the truth and then see what happens. You don't, there's really no or. In my mind, unless something like Nazi Germany is happening, where you have a psychotic all or nothing march across Europe by a regime that is completely out of control, there's not a whole lot of negotiations. You got to do what you got to do, take your chances, and see if you can take down this threat. You can't negotiate with an avalanche. It's just happening. So, but back to this reply that I have about all this hullabaloo about a temple being built on the ruins of Jerusalem. Now, let's just say, for the sake of argument, someone came along and wanted to demolish Notre Dame in order to build a McDonald's or another temple or church to a different religion. McDonald's is not really the appropriate. I mean, that's kind of silly. So I misspoke there. So you want to knock down Notre Dame in order to build a temple to Atlantis Lost. Right, there you go. Everybody loves Atlantis, but you got to draw the line. I mean, do you really want to sacrifice Notre Dame for a new age version of something you don't even know exists? Well, maybe you do, and great, just knock it down and build it, or not, you know. But if there was a revolt against building an Atlantean, a conceptualized Atlantean temple, and Notre Dame would have to be sacrificed, I can understand that. I mean, I can understand an uprising out of that. Shots fired, skirmishes, maybe some kidnapping and ransom. Who knows? I mean, there's all kinds of that would be quite the show. So, but let's just say there was just a big pile of debris there that was once Notre Dame. Well, what's the big deal? I mean, better something than nothing. But then again, this debris is called an archaeological site. The ruins. It's romantic. I mean, it's like, well, look at that big old pile of rubble and timber. Well, in my mind, if you know the government is going to build this thing, it's not worth dying over. It's not worth turning into a symbol of your identity and your family's identity and existence and your friends. And it's not worth haunting 20 generations ahead of you over, because the trickle-down effect of being exiled by the Romans, well, it's accumulative. It does affect generations in front. And some traditions say that whatever you do now affects 7 generations into the past and 7 into the future. So just on that premise, these big events, they're not just about next month or next year or your lifetime. They have implications, maybe 600-700 years. But people don't operate on that level of conscience and self-reserve. I mean, it's all about us and them, and now or never. So, getting to the end of this, part 2 is almost over. So this is what I said about this whole piece that I read in part 1 and a little bit in part 2. Guerrilla tactics and underground tunnels. Imagine that. All over a construction planned project. Of course, that's too simple. Undoubtedly, the temple plan was an excuse, like all wars, to rally the citizenry and not the actual compounded issues between the invented my version of the monad deity and the many deities whom the Romans paid homage to. Patriarchal projected mass ego versus patriarchal projected mass ego. So ultimately, it's like too many chiefs are in the tent. You've got one domineering ethnic group and another domineering ethnic group, and eventually something's going to go down, because there's egos involved. There's alpha. There's too many alpha males and not enough beta, not enough bending and compromises. Again, it's a game. There's no self-restraint, no priorities. Priorities are all mixed up, if they're even there at all. So, patriarchal projected mass ego versus patriarchal projected mass ego. Wars get launched firstly inside the mass psyches of the collective. So it happens in the collective minds, in the fervor of the people, them getting amped up and fearful that the prediction is going to come true, like George Bush in Afghanistan saying that there's weapons of mass destruction. And of course, the scientists that were advising him at the time as a rehabilitating alcoholic, which George Bush, not senior but junior, was, they were telling him those tubes that you're seeing are not the grade for the kind of weapons of mass destruction that you're looking for. And of course, that whole situation was pre-planned, and they created all kinds of false flags in order to justify it. But the American public was whipped into a fervor around it. You had Christians praying over missiles, and it was a complete madhouse. So again, these things are manipulative when you have a reactionary citizenry. They're very easy to manipulate and feed a narrative, even change the narrative and morph and biomorph and all kinds of morphs. When you're a reactionary, you have no footing, you have no anchorage, no filters. So it seems humans eat that stuff up. It's hardwired in, no off button, no yellow light, just green all the way to its usual all-encompassing self-destruction. So competition, what I'm talking about, like us against you, the teams against each other, winner loser. It's like hardwired in since the Cro-Magnons took out the Neanderthals. It's like, it's a game. Again, it has no ethical, moral, or principled value whatsoever to distinguish yourself as other than human. It's just nonsense. And it's hurting people. It's killing people. Mass genocide. Not that there's such a thing as anything but that, but it's concerning, and not just concerning. It is absolutely imperative that things are said and recorded so that in the future, maybe by some small chance, someone's going to come across someone suggesting something, and maybe then they're like, oh, well, yeah, the time is right. That sounds like a good idea. Let's try it. And then maybe that's when it happens. Who knows? But until you share things and you put them out there, then what? You're just a perpetual frozen egg with no good reason to complain. So I say, when you hyper-distinguish yourself within a society to which you technically belong, odd tribal stuff starts to happen. Folks resent your better-than vibes and egoic pride of being different for the sake of being different. So to primordially distinguish yourself from others by doubting their rights to be seen and acknowledged. It happens to this day and happened within the war crimes of the USA's colonizer plotting. So this whole idea of creating a culture or a belief system or a religion in order to distinguish yourself from others, in order to exercise your pride and your quest for better than, this is all destructive sociopathy. It's mental illness. It is truly mental illness. It's like clandestine mental illness. where you're like, oh, well, I don't eat that because God considers it beneath me. Well, what if there's only like 0.5% of the world's population that doesn't eat, that like only 0.5% of the population of the world don't eat that, and everyone else does, and you make it a big deal. And so wherever you go, everyone's eating it and you can't. So that creates stress, that creates tension, that creates confusion. Is that necessary? No, it's not necessary. And within moderation, you can eat anything you want. Well, outside of like something radioactive, but I'm just saying that come on, guys. I mean, we're just making stuff up in order to achieve some sort of transient sense of worth, which then cloaks real worth, like getting down to, well, so what if you're vegetarian? Can you change a tire? Do you have a trade? What can you do? What's your character? What do you think about UFOs? Could you stitch your leg with a needle and thread if you're marooned on an island? I mean, like, what is the character of your being? What is the character of, what are you made of? Not what differentiates you from others. I'm not interested. I mean, at least not initially. If that's your main project, is expounding upon how different you are than me, I'm not interested in you, because you're the project and I don't want more projects. I want friends. I want people who acknowledge me and see me as I'm doing the same for them. I mean, that's friendship. Exhibitionists, self-pollinating fruit trees, no thank you. So pride stemming from a personal hardwired sense of lack. Pride stemming from lack. Classic psychoanalysis situation. For every arrogant non-virtue, there's a void. It's a coping mechanism. It's an exaggeration of something that's missing. And it's a very strange way to get it. Maybe that would be in another video, how it is that human beings can be the opposite of what they really want and need for themselves. How is the universe supposed to respond to that? It doesn't make any sense to me. But maybe through suffering, the fact that you're a contradiction to your desires, slowly you learn through being tortured how to get those things. It's like no pain, no gain. Maybe the universe or life in general, internal life in general, works like that too. Nothing's easy when it comes to character building and self-esteem and dignity and respect and all that stuff. None of that comes natural. So again, when you hyper-distinguish yourself within a society to which you technically belong to, odd tribal stuff starts to happen. So we went through that. Pride stemming from a personal hardwired sense of self or sense of lack. Otherness so to frame that lack as special, as if all humans don't suffer from its systemic claws. All humans lack something. all humans want something they don't have. I mean, it's natural. No need to exaggerate it. No need to make it special as if it's yours and yours alone. Arrogance in believing you have something acquired from a faith-based system of sketchy feelings, sketchy manipulations of form and function to fit your divine mold, fabricated resentment of others built on pure ego and no humanity, no base morals, keeping the ego in check, as it creates an imposing system of icons and legends so to distinguish, compete, create the other. All this. Humans sure get into some dense stuff by being bored with themselves. So again, maybe I read that too fast, but I think you get the point that, let me read it slower because I think this is important. Arrogance in believing you have something acquired from a faith-based system of sketchy feelings, sketchy manipulations of form and function to fit your divine mold, fabricated resentment of others built on pure ego and no humanity, no base morals, keeping the ego in check, as it creates an opposing system of icons and legends so to distinguish, compete, create the other. So this quest for attention, curiously enough, is a dysfunction, ultimately, at least this kind of attention, because this kind of attention creates wars and genocides and conflict. You get attention, but you don't get any love. You don't get any safety. You don't get any respect. You only get respect from people that you expect it from, which is the worst kind. That's predictable respect. That's just being cucked to your own expectations and your own daily routine of being complimented by, well, people that compliment you all the time. Well, that's boring. That's predictable. Wouldn't it be great to be complimented by someone you don't even know? That will never happen if you're a supremacist, if you're creating enemies in order to imagine that you're your best friend. There's a mental situation there. There's something going on there that you need to take care of on the inside and stop projecting it outward and trying to solve your problems through creating problems. So, moral of the story. When your hosts accept you, the Romans, don't make it harder by digging tunnels and creating drama where there is none, then crying wolf that your hand is stuck in the dark in an empty cookie jar. So the gist of it is this. There's a lot of people under oppression in the world. There's people under oppression in the United States. Of course, there was an insurrection at the White House. That was interesting. But ultimately, that wasn't a class insurrection. That was a cult of one. Like, it was built around Trump and to make America great again, as if it were ever great. I mean, when was it great? Before it was discovered by any human being? It's silly. It was more like a concert riot than a real insurrection, because there was no class consciousness around it. There was no unionized day after plan where, okay, we're going to take the White House and then we're going to go down and drag the Lincoln Monument into the Potomac and you know, sell the artifacts in the Library of Congress on eBay. Like there was no, it wasn't an organized class societal revolution where anything was going to change. It was just a concert stampede and a tragic one. People got killed and it was pretty nutty. But it was not like if you go through history, like what happened in Russia with the czars and what happened in Haiti with the French. It, it, it doesn't meet, it doesn't cut the mustard. It's not. That was like low calorie insurrection, like a sort of like a after hours Fox News debate or something. Contentious, fatal, but at the end of the day, meaningless, absolutely meaningless, outside of the fact that America is a Anglo-Saxon supremacist country, always has been. I'm not sure if it always will be, but it just is, and racism is systemic throughout the United States, and it's a mental illness. It's identifying as this or that, distinguishing yourself above and beyond moral codes, standards, character, dignity, respect, empathy, sympathy, help, care, love, manliness, femininity without the extra baggage of having to defend yourself 24/7 from all sides of judgmental, broken patriarchy. I mean, it's like there's no room to breathe. I mean, I think people tend to lean into superficial things because there's no room for them to be themselves, at least not outside of their own private Idahos. And yeah, it's a conundrum. So here's the last part here. So you choose to fight on a mountain around a building project. Great. There's nothing more rational than losing hundreds of thousands of your side's lives and being exiled into an emboldening desert than throwing oneself upon the feverish, dissonant worship of an idol, which were the ruins of a temple preaching against idol worship. When humans do hypocrisy, they do it really right. Fortune cookie side note, it's never about the land nor the ruins. It's about what people make important above and beyond being a good person, a decent, respecting, caring, helpful person who recognizes the autonomy of every human being, whether they're weirded out or not. They are individualized. They are a singular creation like no other. They deserve some space. They deserve some consideration, some benefit of the doubt. They deserve a deeper understanding than just a reactionary, judgmental, punishing world. Punishment is not intelligence. It's impatient. it's dispassionate. We could do better with the will. If we had the will to follow through with our creative imaginations, wow, the things we could do. But we're creatures of habit, which makes us more creatures than human. Habit is a double-edged sword. Routine is one thing, habit is another. Habit is what you assume, not even knowing you're assuming it. You're just behaving a certain way automatically. Routine is something you have to remind yourself to do and then do it. Two totally different things. So be good, be well. Thanks for hanging out, and share the video if you liked it. And until next time, take care.